Thanks, Bethany. Welcome, everyone. It's nice to see you all this afternoon. We're here today to talk about performance management in KPay. I think when a lot of people hear performance management, they automatically jump to reviews. And we're definitely going to talk about performance reviews. We're going to spend a little time talking about how they work in the system, as well as looking at the configuration and some of those options. But it's more than that. I also want to talk about goal setting and how performance development works and how those relate to reviews, along with peer feedback, which is something that is relatively new to the system. I think it rolled out maybe about a year ago as an enhancement, and we've started to see folks gradually adopt that. But I think that's a great feature that I want to talk a little bit about. I'm also going to cover incidents, so disciplinary tracking as under the umbrella of performance management. I'm also going to spend a few minutes talking about employee surveys. They're not strictly part of performance management, but I feel like they're a nice supplement to keep your finger on the pulse of how your employees are doing. So instead of you delivering to the employees how they're doing, it's a chance for the employees to provide feedback back to you on performance. So I want to just touch on that briefly. I do think we'll definitely have time for questions at the end, so be sure to put those into chat as we're going, and we can address those all when we get there. All right, let me switch over to my KPay window. Perfect. All right, so I'm going to talk first about performance reviews. And performance reviews can run the gamut in the system from very structured and complex to very simple check-ins between managers and employees. It's able to accommodate all of those. And what I want to talk about to show that is I want to walk through how the review profile gets configured, not necessarily with the intent that you would want to set this up yourself. You certainly can if you feel comfortable. But I think talking through some of that gives an illustration of how it works in the system and will provide some food for thought in terms of how you may want to structure your own setup, or if you're an existing performance review user inside of KPay, it may provide some detail for those nagging questions you've always had about, well, why does this happen this way? So I'm going to start with the profiles. These are going to be under HR setup and performance reviews. They're a little sneaky because they're there instead of under the normal profile menu. You can have as many different profiles as you want for different groups. We generally say that the profile only needs to be different if the actual format or workflow is different. If you have a different cadence, if some people get them every 6 months and others get them every year, you may still be able to use the same profile for that. But as you look at the profile, there are a few main things that I want to point out in terms of how the system works and how it manages performance reviews. So the first one is just around the scheduling. By default, the way the review profile works is it only runs once per session, and that can be annually, it can be quarterly, it can be semi-annually, it can be monthly. But for those of you that have probationary reviews or new hire reviews that come after 45 days or 90 days like that, you still can accommodate that inside of KPay by using a sub profile. They're down here at the bottom. There's not one enabled for this particular setup. But if they are using the same format, again, in the same workflow, you still can accommodate that within the system. The other thing to keep in mind as you're thinking about reviews is the anchor date. So this one is actually set up really, really poorly in terms of how we would administer it, because it's set to a specific date and year, and so it's going to calculate reviews based off that point. And so with new hires, it's going to get complicated. You can use any date in the system. So you can use hire date or date started if you do rolling reviews throughout the year. And then the system will calculate based on the employee hire date or the employee start date. The difficulty comes in that we often see there's exceptions. The thought may be that you're going to use hire date, and then something changes for a particular employee, or if you're going to use start date because you're going to change it based on every time an employee moves into a new role or moves to a new level, that makes sense. And it probably does, but the way people use those dates in the system isn't always consistent. So there is a review date field standard in KPay, and for the most part, I recommend that people use that, whether you're using hire date, whether you're using start date, even if everyone gets all of their reviews at the same time, if everyone gets to review the 1st of November, I still like to use the review date as the anchor date because it gives you flexibility down the road. Because if you decide then to switch from a hire date based structure to a everybody all at once type structure, you can simply do a mass edit to change those dates on the employees as opposed to having to edit the profiles or create new profiles. So that's something that I really like folks to think about. The other settings here are just about the frequency, which is typically annual, and then when the first review triggers. So this is geared around new hires. If you've got one at 90 days, if you've got one at a year, a quarter, whenever that is, you can set those rules. The profile is also the primary place that you're going to control visibility. And to that, it means what does the employee see versus what does the manager see as they go through the process. There is some ability to control that through the workflow, but the primary settings for the visibility are going to be in the profile. The profile is also going to control if the employee does a self-review. It's also going to control whether the system automatically creates the next set of reviews for you. So some of you who may have been using performance reviews for a long time may be manually scheduling and initiating the reviews in the system still. I do run into a lot of folks that still are doing it themselves. But between this setting and this checkbox down here to start automatically, you can build rules into the profile that as soon as you add an employee to the system and put in the appropriate dates, it will automatically schedule the review. And when they finalize a review, it will automatically schedule the next review. So if you are using performance reviews and you are not already automatically initiating them, definitely let us know, reach out to support so that we can help you get that started, because you're probably taking manual steps that you don't really need to. All right. The other side goes into the actual content of the review. There are three main sections of the review form inside of KPay: core values, competencies, and goals. And unfortunately, you cannot change the names of these, and you cannot rearrange them. You don't have to use all three. So for example, over here, we can choose, if you're not using core values, we can uncheck that box and then not use that in your review. But if you're going to use these three categories, that is what they're going to be called. There's not any flexibility in the way that works. But inside it, you can control, for example, on the competencies, whether they're company-based, which means you're going to set the same list of questions for every employee on this profile, or job-based, which means you could have a set of questions as part of the job record. And so when the employee review comes, each person's may be a little bit different depending on what questions flow across from their job. So that's really where the flexibility comes from in the system, and the fact that you can have a standardized review template that everyone uses, or you can have a very personalized list of questions that are job specific. The same goes for goals. So again, you can have company-wide goals that are assigned broadly. You can have personal goals that may be created by the employee or by their manager. And you can also have shared goals that are linked amongst a group of employees. So there's a lot of different options there. I'm going to talk a little bit more about goals and how they tie into reviews in just a second, but you can definitely pull them into reviews. And the last main piece on the review that I like to talk about is the review effects. And this controls what happens at the end. So for example, when you get to the end of a performance review, does that automatically trigger a pay increase conversation for you? We can include compensation as part of the review process. Or if you have a pay change HR action already built, we can trigger that HR action as part of the review process. Similarly, if things like schedule might change or there's a bonus process, those can be automatically attached to the review profile as part of the configuration. So what happens when a review kicks off? Again, there's a setting here that says initiate a number of set days before the schedule. So when I'm looking at my employees here under team and talent, performance and performance reviews, this is going to show me all of my reviews for my company. If they're in progress, that means they're out in the world and visible to either employees or managers, depending on the setting. If they are finalized, that means that they are done and locked down. And if they are scheduled, that means they're not yet visible to anyone, but the system has automatically created those and assigned a due date to them. And then a certain number of days before that, then your workflow will kick off, and it will kick off with notifications to employees and to managers. When that happens, they're going to get, again, notifications via email or text message, whatever your process is, but it's going to end up in their to-dos. So let's take a look here. I'll just filter out for a performance review here. So I've got one I can finish. I'm going to come in and fill out my review as the manager. I can see some information about the goals. I can see information about the weighting. I can see the dates. You can have tabs here for instructions for managers. You can have places where managers can enter notes as well as ratings. And depending on your particular workflow, the manager could possibly be doing their review at the same time that the employee is doing the self-review, or it could be sequential where once the employee finishes their portion, then it flows on to the manager. So a lot of different options there in terms of how the reviews are structured, but that always then leads to that conversation about the goals section. So a lot of companies have moved, instead of a fixed list of questions, an employee will set goals for themselves for the year, or the manager will set goals for them for the year, and then they're rated based on their ability to achieve those goals. And KPay can absolutely accommodate that. What will happen is, again, under talent and performance, there's a section for performance development, which is what we call the goal setting. From here, I'm logged in as a manager right now. If I were logged in, I'm going to go over to this other tab where I'm just an employee. Employees would also have the ability to access this, but it's going to be under my career, performance. They're going to have my goals here where they can access their own information and update their own goals when it's time to do so. The interface is going to look the same for both. They're going to have the option to create a goal, and they're going to get an entry screen like this where they can give it a name, they can put in some dates, a description, a category, criteria for achievement. And again, the manager can enter this for the employee, or the employee can enter it for themselves, depending on what you want to allow. The thing that's really neat about the way KPay manages goals, though, is you can use them as part of performance reviews, or you can make it an entirely separate tool to simply manage employee development. So depending on the dates that you use here, both the effective date as well as the due date, and whether you've checked this box that says enable for performance reviews, if the goal is set to be part of reviews and the dates fall into the period of the review, then when that review initiated, these goals are going to pull over, and employees can rate themselves, or managers can rate them on their progress towards that goal, which is great if that's the way that you want to manage it. If you're just using it as an employee tool where managers perhaps have tracked a goal that they want, I want this employee, they've got a particular sales goal. I can set that for the employee. It doesn't have to be part of a performance review cycle, but I can still come in here to the employee's goal and enter notes about it. I can enter notes that are shared. If I sit down and meet with the employee and I want to document our conversation, I can add a shared note that then would be both visible to the manager and the employee about their progress towards that goal. Or I can enter a private note as a manager that's only available to me, the system administrator, whoever else according to access, about the employee's progress on that goal. If I have concerns or if I have plans that I'm making that perhaps are not visible to the employees, this is where I can document that information. The other piece of goals is, you'll see these buttons up here, you'd have the ability to cascade and align goals. And what that means is, in your organization, if a manager sets a goal and they would like to push that goal out to other people on their team, they can cascade that goal down. Aligning is essentially the opposite, where when you set a goal, you can look at your manager's goals and align one of your goals with them. So let me give you an example. If a manager sets a goal that we're going to sell $1 million of business this year, that's the manager's goal for the department. Maybe I, as an employee, say I'm going to do $125,000 of that goal. So I can align that under my manager's goals so that they're tied together for reporting purposes. But I still have my individual goal, the manager still has their goal, and we can track that as they kind of roll through the system and see different pieces. So goals and performance reviews can tie very closely together in that way, or again, they can be completely separate depending on how you choose to use them. The next thing that I want to touch on that can also be part of performance reviews or a completely separate process is peer feedback. So the peer feedback tool allows you to create a questionnaire that either the employee selects peers that they would like to provide feedback on them, or the manager can select those employees, and they get a survey through the system. Again, once they receive it, let me show you what it would look like at the end, and then I'll show you some of the reporting. I've got one out here. So Kathy is being asked to provide feedback on another employee. So she's going to come in here and provide feedback. There's a survey. Again, these questions are all flexible depending on what you want. I'm going to say I interact with them weekly. I can provide comments on these scores. You can choose whether this feedback is going to be attached to a person's name or whether it's going to be anonymous. But once they finished it, they're going to go ahead and submit that. And then the manager has the ability to review that, again, under talent and performance, peer feedback. Here's where I could assign it. But if I want to go out and see, Kathy's feedback that she's received, I can see all of the people that she asked for feedback. I can see who's in progress at providing it and who's submitted it. For those that have already submitted it, I can look at their notes and look at their comments. The way that this can tie into performance reviews is twofold. One, obviously it depends on scheduling. So for example, here at Bergen KDV, we use both peer feedback and performance reviews inside of KPay, and they are aligned. So part of our annual performance process is to select peer reviewers as well as doing a self-evaluation. So when that goes out and then it comes back in, when I'm a manager going through and reviewing someone, when I'm looking at their performance review, let's take a look just at one of these in progress ones as an example. I can pull in those development goals that we talked about, so all of the goal setting pieces that maybe aren't automatically drawn through. I can also see that employee's peer feedback results while I'm doing the performance review. And again, this is up to you whether you choose to tie them together or not. But there's some good arguments for both ways. I think the peer feedback as a separate tool, especially if you do it more often than yearly, to gather feedback on how you're interacting or how you're viewed inside the company is great. I also like it as part of the performance review to be able to gather that in addition to just the manager's view on how the employee is doing, to be able to tie in the peer views on how the employee is doing. So the last piece of this that relates to performance reviews and tying or not tying, you can see here on this dropdown, is incidents. And so incidents are often also referred to as disciplinary tracking. I'm not a big fan of either of those terms. I really wish that there were something a little bit less negative in terms of how it were named, because I've seen a lot of clients that would really like to use incidents for tracking all kinds of things, and they do use it for all kinds of things, but not necessarily negative things. We've seen some folks use it for awards or service milestones or some other things like that. But the way it's designed in the system, it is definitely structured towards disciplinary setup. Incidents live somewhere a little bit different. It's not under talent, it's under the main HR menu and under HR maintenance. Again, depending on your particular setup, you can have a variety of incident types. We'll just start off with Josh here. We're going to give him a verbal warning. But what the system allows you to do is to collect information about the incident, about whether it's a violation of a specific policy, what the resolution is the employee put on a performance review plan, a performance improvement plan, what is the follow-up, what is the timeline for that, and report on that. One of the real strengths of the incident piece inside the system is, like much of KPay, is the ability to tie it to workflows. So you can have managers initiate an incident in the system, for example, and then you can have it flow up to HR to review, provide feedback, make sure that the manager has documented everything appropriately, and then you can make it visible to the employee. You can even have the employee sign it electronically in the system if you want them to, depending on what your process is. About other folks that maybe print them out and then scan them and upload them later. But I like to have folks e-sign it if they can. So the incidents really allow you to have a view, longer term of employee performance. So in addition to being able to pull these incidents into that performance review, it's going to just pull things, again, based on date that happened inside the period of the review. So, which may be helpful, or you may want a little longer term view, which is where the ability to see all of the incidents in one place, as well as from an HR perspective, being able to see trends on, are we seeing similar kinds of policy violations? Are we seeing, more incidents in one particular department or one area of the business? The strength of being able to identify trends is a big part of the value of getting them inside of KPay. The last piece about incidents that I do get a lot of questions about, especially for folks that are also using timekeeping and have no-fault point-based attendance policies, those can also integrate together. So if you've got a points-based attendance policy and you are using timekeeping inside of KPay, the system can automatically initiate these incidents based on their point levels. So if that's something that you find yourself keeping track of a lot, building some automation, especially if you want managers to take ownership on starting this process, being able to start the incident, assign it to the manager, say this person has 6 points, they need a verbal warning, the manager fills it out, and then it comes to HR to review and approve. And then you can pull it again, pull it back into annual reviews when it's time for reviews, is a big push to get everything together. So that's really the overview of the employee performance management. It's a combination of performance reviews, goal setting, peer feedback, and incident or disciplinary tracking. And those can either be 4 separate items that you manage all separately that don't interact, or they can all flow together and knit together into one process, depending on how you want to see them. as I wrap up today, I do want to talk about surveys because, like I say, I think surveys fall under the performance umbrella more to measure your business performance. Engagement surveys, especially in today's world with hiring being what it is, understanding what your employees like and don't like is extremely valuable. And so I really encourage you to use the survey tool that's available to you, especially since, for those of you who are only using HR Core, the survey tool is part of the basic HR package. It's not technically even part of the review piece. It lives under the HR section. There's its own section for surveys. And you can build out, let me go over here and show you the setup. You can build out any number of different surveys that you want. And if you've used SurveyMonkey or something like that in the past to do employee surveys, you're going to find this really similar because you can build out branching questionnaires. You can say, if I say yes to this, then it goes on to the next question. You can choose whether it's anonymous, and you can test it here in the survey piece. There's also some pre-built surveys, which is great. So if you want to build an employee engagement survey or a manager effectiveness survey, and you aren't quite sure where to start, you can populate it from the pre-built surveys. It will have some questions for you. You can go ahead and edit and use them as you see fit. But it's great because there's a lot of good material right out of the box. Then you can use the survey tools to launch those questionnaires, push them out to employees. Again, since they're already coming into KPay for other pieces, you've got, it'll show up in their mailbox on the homepage. You can drive notifications that they're already used to getting. And then you'll be able to pull in survey answers and see the statistics about the responses broken down by employee demographic information. So there's automatic filters to filter by gender, by employee type, by location. So there's a lot of great analytic tools already built around the surveys that you don't have to create yourself. So I really would encourage you, even if you're not using the employee performance pieces of KPay, to look at the surveys as a business performance piece and look at how to initiate those and how you might be able to use them to improve how you're functioning. So with that, Bethany, I'm ready for some questions.
Awesome. We got a couple here coming through. If anyone else wants to submit a question while we're live, go ahead in the chat function or the question bar there. The first one we got, Micah, are incidents able to be hidden from employees, or are they always visible?
No, you can absolutely hide them from employees through the security profile. So they do not have to be able to see them after the fact.
Great. The next one here, could we use the survey tool for exit interviews?
Sort of. The way that it works right now, it's not ideal for that. Because as you're looking at these survey collectors, they're called, where you set up what survey you're going to start and what the start dates and end dates are, the way it works right now is until the end date has gone past, you can't see any results from the survey. And I understand the logic behind that, because especially if it is supposed to be an anonymous survey, you don't want people going to look at the results too early and being able to figure out who the respondents are just based on the number of people that have replied. And anonymity is easier in large groups. So the issue with using it as an exit survey is you would either need to make a survey collector for each person, which I think would be a nightmare. I think you could potentially do it where you maybe set one up, monthly or weekly or something like that, where you've got a very short time frame, so you can still get frequent feedback. But I do hope that some future enhancements make it a little bit more useful for exit surveys, because it's so much easier to use than, say, custom forms, for those of you who have dealt with that. So my answer right now is sort of, kind of, but it might be a little clunky because you can't see the results until the end date.
Okay, sure, that makes sense. The next one here, do employees have to sign incidents?
They do not, no. It's a choice that you make in the workflow. You can route it to the employee to sign, or you can just have it go from manager to HR to done, or whatever those steps are. They don't have to sign it.
Okay, great. And the last one here, unless anybody else wants to slide a question in there while we're live, are there automated reminders for managers who fall behind on performance reviews?
That is a great question. And there can be. So there's a couple of different ways you can tackle that depending on who you want to remind. So one is, as you're looking at this performance review report that shows the status and the scheduled date, what you can do is you could filter this to show only reviews that are in progress, where the scheduled date is in the past, and then you could set that as a scheduled report to deliver to, whoever's in charge, or to HR, on a weekly basis or however often, and they could follow up with those folks if you're looking for a more in-person follow-up. If you're looking for something more automated, I'm going to show you a little bit on the workflow. I'm not sure if I've got one set up this way, but what we've done with some folks is, when you're looking at your performance review workflow, you've got a step here where the manager is going to do the review, basically. And there's an action option called on expired. And what that lets you do is say, after a certain amount of time has passed. So after this has sat in their inbox for a week, move it to a certain step in the workflow. And so what we've seen people do is sort of create loops around where, when the review step has sat there for a week, they hit the on expired, and then it just loops back and sends the notification to the manager again to start the review, to make sure that they saw the email that says, hey, you've got a review to do. So yeah, there's definitely a couple of different options there depending on who you're trying to remind and how best to get in front of them.
Okay, great. Another one that came through here then, that probably kind of ties to this in a way. What is the accessibility to get support as we're learning the new things in the system?
Yeah, I mean, the best option is just to put in a ticket with the regular payroll at Bergen KDV support line. There's a separate group of folks. For those of you who are newer customers, the support team is kind of split in half. There's one group that focuses primarily on payroll. I guess it's more than in half. There's one group that focuses mainly on tax, and there's another group that focuses on HR items. So if you put in it, we all use the same email box, the payroll at bergenkdv.com. And so as those come in, someone from the HR team that you may know, they may have done your implementation, can reach out and help you set these up and hop on the phone and kind of talk through stuff. You'll probably talk to me too. I end up on a lot of those.
Awesome, great, thank you. And then the last one here, unless I see any others come through, is there a report to show the profiles that you have set up and who is assigned to each profile?
There's a couple of different ways to see it. So depending on what you're looking for. So for example, first one, let's just go look, since we're talking about performance reviews. If you look at the review profile list, anywhere you see a list of profiles, whether it's security profiles or whatever else, if you see this little head here, if you click on that, it'll show you a list of who's assigned to that profile, which is handy. And then you know too that if there's no little head here, it means no one's actually assigned to this particular profile. If you're looking for something broader, or you're looking for multiple profiles at one time, the employee information report is usually where I start, and you can do add and columns, and just about all of the profiles should be available here to pull through ACA accruals, benefits. So you can just check off which profile you're wanting to see and add that into your report view. And then you can see who's assigned to which. Oh, I picked a bad one because no one's actually using that, but you get the idea. But yes, so either you can go through the profile or you can add it into the employee information.
Awesome, thank you. We didn't have any others come in here. But I will reiterate just real quick that we will be sending out the recording here as well as the presentation. And then if there are any other questions or anything, we'll send out a short survey here to capture any feedback that you might have or ideas maybe for future webinars. We do these about every month here. So feel free to use that spot to enter any feedback. With that, Micah, I think we'll go ahead and close. Do you have anything you'd like to say?
No, I just thanks for everybody for coming for these. We've been doing these for a number of months now, and they're always really great. The feedback is great. We do look for, those survey responses again, especially for ideas for future webinars and what folks would like to hear more about. So do fill those out and give us your thoughts.
Great. Thanks. Have a good rest of your day, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.